I never should have taken the apartment. It wasn't because of the peeling wallpaper or the faint smell of mildew that lingered in the hallways. It wasn't even the strange landlord, Mr. Finch, who seemed too eager to rent the place. It was cheap, and I was broke. Desperation has a way of overriding common sense. At first, it seemed like a blessing, a studio apartment in the city for a fraction of what it should have cost. Sure, it was old and run down, but I figured a little cleaning and some air fresheners would make it livable. I didn't know about the basement. The first night was uneventful. I unpacked my few belongings, ordered takeout, and tried to settle in. The place had its quirks, the occasional creak of the floorboards, the faint hum of pipes in the walls, but nothing that felt out of the ordinary for an old building. It wasn't until the second night that things started to feel off. I was lying in bed, scrolling through my phone, when I heard it, a faint sound like someone dragging something heavy across the floor. It was coming from below me. I froze, my thumb hovering over the screen. The sound continued for a few seconds, then stopped abruptly. I reminded myself that I lived in a building with other tenants. Maybe someone was moving furniture or unpacking late at night. It wasn't a big deal. But when I asked Mr. Finch about it the next day, he gave me a strange look. "There's no one below you," he said. I blinked. "What do you mean? I thought there was a basement apartment." He shook his head. "The basement's empty. Has been for years. I should have moved out right then and there, but I didn't." Part of me didn't want to believe him, and another part didn't want to admit that I might have made a mistake renting the place. That night, I heard it again. The same dragging sound, followed by a faint, rhythmic tapping. I told myself it was probably just the pipes, even though I knew it didn't sound like pipes. But then at around 3 a.m., I heard something new. Whispering. It was so faint I thought I might be imagining it, but the longer I listened, the clearer it became. A low, guttural voice, speaking words I couldn't understand. I lay there, paralyzed, staring at the ceiling. My breath felt loud in the silence, each inhale and exhale a reminder of how utterly alone I was. When the whispering finally stopped, I didn't sleep for the rest of the night. The next morning, I decided to investigate. The door to the basement was at the end of the hallway, just past the laundry room. It was locked, of course, but the doorframe was old and brittle. A few solid kicks, and it gave way. The air inside was damp and stale, and the single light bulb hanging from the ceiling barely illuminated the space. The basement was empty, just like Mr. Finch had said, but there was something wrong with the floor. In the center of the room, the concrete was cracked and uneven, as if something had been buried beneath it. The cracks formed a strange pattern, almost like symbols, though I couldn't make sense of them. I stood there for a long time, staring at the floor, a gnawing sense of dread building in my stomach. And then I heard it, the whispering. It was louder now, more distinct, and it was coming from beneath the floor. I stumbled backward, nearly tripping over my own feet. The whispers grew louder, rising to a cacophony of voices, all overlapping, all speaking in that same guttural tone. I ran. I told Mr. Finch what I'd heard, but he just laughed it off. "You've got an overactive imagination," he said, waving a hand dismissively. "This building is old. It makes noises." I wanted to believe him. I really did. But the next few nights made it impossible. The sounds didn't stop. If anything, they got worse. I started hearing footsteps in the middle of the night, heavy and deliberate, pacing back and forth below me. Sometimes, I'd hear the faint sound of scratching, like nails scraping against wood. And then there were the dreams. Every night, I dreamed of the basement. I saw the cracked floor, the strange symbols, and the darkness that seemed to seep up from the ground like a living thing. In the dreams, I wasn't alone. There was something in the basement with me. A shadowy figure, its form shifting and indistinct. It would stand at the edge of the light, watching me with eyes that glowed faintly in the darkness. I always woke up drenched in sweat, my heart racing, the whispers from the dreams lingering in my ears. I started avoiding the apartment as much as possible. I stayed out late, finding any excuse to delay going home. But no matter where I went, I couldn't escape the feeling that I was being watched. One night, I returned home to find the door to the basement ajar. I knew I hadn't left it that way. My first instinct was to call the police, but something stopped me. Some part of me knew that this wasn't something they could help with. Against my better judgment, I grabbed a flashlight and descended the stairs. The basement was darker than before, the single light bulb now flickering weakly. The air was colder, and the smell of mildew was overpowering. I shone the flashlight across the room, my hands trembling. The cracks in the floor were wider now, the symbols more pronounced. And then I saw it. A hand, pale and skeletal, reaching up through one of the cracks. I stumbled back, my flashlight slipping from my grasp. The bulb shattered as it hit the ground, plunging the room into darkness. The whispers returned, louder than ever, filling the space with their guttural chorus. I scrambled for the stairs, my heart pounding in my chest. But before I could reach the top, the door slammed shut. I was trapped. The whispers grew louder, more insistent, until they were all I could hear. And then they stopped. For a moment, the silence was deafening. And then I heard it, a voice deep and resonant, speaking a single word. Stay. I don't know how long I was down there. When I woke up, I was lying on the basement floor, the cold concrete pressing against my back. The cracks in the floor were gone, the symbols faded. I stumbled out of the basement and back to my apartment, my mind a haze of fear and confusion. I tried to leave that day, but the landlord stopped me. You can't just break your lease, he said, his tone cold. You signed a contract. When I insisted, he gave me a strange look and said something that chilled me to the bone. You're part of the building now. That was weeks ago. The whispers haven't stopped. They follow me wherever I go, a constant reminder that I'll never truly be free. The cracks in the floor have started appearing in my apartment now, small at first but growing larger every day. Sometimes late at night, I hear the voice again. Stay, it says. And I'm starting to think I don't have a choice. I thought about running, packing whatever I could carry and fleeing without looking back. But Mr. Finch's words echoed in my head. You're part of the building now. What did that even mean? I spent the next day pacing my apartment, trying to convince myself it was just an attempt to scare me into staying. He was a creep, sure, but surely he couldn't stop me from leaving. Could he? When evening fell, I resolved to go. The whispers hadn't stopped, but they had quieted, fading into the background like the hum of a distant machine. It gave me just enough clarity to plan my escape. I shoved my belongings into a duffel bag, clothes, toiletries, my laptop. Everything else I left behind. As I reached for the door, the whispers surged. Stay. The word wasn't a shout or a scream. It was quiet, almost pleading, but it came from everywhere. The walls, the floor, even the air around me seemed to hum with it. I froze, my hand hovering over the doorknob, and then the lights went out. I stood in the darkness, clutching my bag, my pulse hammering in my ears. I told myself it was just a power outage, a coincidence, but deep down I knew better. I fumbled for my phone, using the flashlight to illuminate the room. The shadows seemed deeper than they should have been, stretching and writhing at the edges of the beam. And then I saw the cracks. They were everywhere, splintering across the walls, the ceiling, even the door. The same jagged patterns I'd seen in the basement, the same symbols etched into the concrete. The whispers grew louder, overlapping in a chaotic cacophony that made my head throb. I pressed my hands to my ears, but it didn't help. The sound wasn't just in my ears, it was in my mind, burrowing deeper with every passing second. And then I heard the voice again. Don't leave. It was deeper this time, more forceful. Something slammed against the door, hard enough to rattle the frame. I stumbled back, dropping my bag, my flashlight swinging wildly. The cracks on the door widened, and through them, I saw something. A hand, pale and skeletal, just like the one I'd seen in the basement. It gripped the edge of the door, its fingers impossibly long and thin, the nails blackened and sharp. I screamed and ran to the corner of the room, huddling against the wall like a terrified child. The hand withdrew, but the cracks didn't close. They stayed there, pulsing faintly, as if the building itself was alive. The power returned hours later, though I had no way of knowing how much time had passed. I sat in the corner, too afraid to move, until the faint hum of electricity brought me back to reality. I should have left then, but I couldn't. Something had changed. The apartment felt heavier, like the air was pressing down on me, and the whispers, though quieter now, had taken on a different tone. They weren't angry anymore. They were expectant. The next few days passed in a blur. I stopped sleeping, too afraid of the dreams that awaited me. Every time I closed my eyes, I was back in the basement, standing over the cracks. The symbols glowed faintly, and the whispers were louder, clearer. In the dreams, the shadowy figure would step closer. I couldn't make out its face, if it even had one, but I could feel its gaze, heavy and oppressive. And every time, just before I woke up, it would speak. Stay. By the 5th day, I was barely functioning. My hands shook constantly, and my eyes ached from lack of sleep. I hadn't eaten more than a few bites of stale bread and crackers, and my stomach churned with hunger and fear. I tried to call for help, but my phone didn't work. No matter who I dialed, the line was dead. Even the outside world seemed to reject me. The windows of the apartment no longer showed the street below. Instead, they were filled with darkness, as if the world beyond the glass had ceased to exist. When I tried to open the windows, they wouldn't budge. The building was sealing me in. I thought about confronting Mr. Finch, demanding answers. But when I stepped into the hallway, I realized I wasn't alone. The shadows were alive. They moved along the walls and floor, shifting and writhing like living things. And they were watching me. I could feel their eyes, countless and unseen, boring into me. I backed into the apartment and slammed the door shut, my breath coming in short, panicked gasps. The whispers rose in a mocking chorus, filling the room with their cruel laughter. That night, I decided to go back to the basement. I didn't know what I hoped to accomplish. Maybe I thought I could find a way to stop whatever was happening, or maybe I just wanted answers. I waited until the whispers faded, then crept down the hallway, clutching a flashlight in one hand and a kitchen knife in the other. The basement door was open. Inside, the cracks had spread across the entire floor, the symbols glowing faintly in the dim light. And in the center of the room, something was rising. It was the figure from my dreams. Its form was still shadowy and indistinct, but now I could see more details. Its limbs were impossibly long, its fingers twisted and clawed. Its face was a shifting mass of darkness, with 2 pinpricks of light where its eyes should have been. The whispers grew louder as it emerged, the air vibrating with their intensity. "Stay," it said, its voice a deep rumble that seemed to shake the very foundations of the building. I backed away, clutching the knife so tightly my knuckles turned white. "What do you want from me?" I shouted, my voice trembling. The figure tilted its head, as if considering my question. "You are part of us now," it said. The floor beneath me cracked and shifted, and I realized with horror that the symbols weren't just decorations. They were bindings, and they were breaking. The floor gave way, and I fell into darkness. I don't know how long I was unconscious, but when I woke up, I was lying on cold, damp stone. The air was thick with the smell of decay, and the whispers were louder than ever, surrounding me in a deafening chorus. I tried to stand, but my body felt heavy, as if something was holding me down. The darkness around me shifted, and I realized I wasn't alone. The figure was there, its glowing eyes staring down at me. "Do you understand now?" it said. I shook my head, tears streaming down my face. I don't understand any of this." It reached out with one clawed hand, its fingers brushing against my face. "You belong to us," it said. "The building is a gateway, and you are the key." I don't know how I escaped. One moment, I was in the darkness, surrounded by the whispers. The next, I was back in my apartment, lying on the floor. The cracks were gone, and the air felt lighter, almost normal. But I knew it wasn't over. The whispers are still with me, quieter now, but always there. And sometimes, when I close my eyes, I see the figure standing in the shadows, watching, waiting. I can't leave the apartment. I've tried, but every time I reach the door, something stops me. I don't know how much longer I can hold on. The cracks are coming back, and the whispers are growing louder. And I'm starting to wonder if I ever really escaped at all. I stopped counting the days. Time felt meaningless, a cycle of darkness punctuated only by faint glimmers of light. I was no longer eating or sleeping. My body had become a husk, moving through a routine I could no longer remember starting. The cracks were everywhere now. They spread across the walls, floor, and ceiling like veins, pulsating faintly with an otherworldly light. At night, I would hear voices, so many voices, all whispering the same message. "It's almost time." I began to notice changes in my reflection. At first, it was subtle. My eyes seemed darker, my skin pale and gray. Then it became undeniable. The reflection no longer matched my movements. I would look into the mirror, and it would stare back, unblinking, even when I turned away. One night, I watched as my reflection smiled at me, though my own face remained frozen in horror. That was the night I gave up pretending that escape was possible. The final straw came when I found the journal. I hadn't noticed it before, but it was sitting on the small table in my apartment, bound in cracked leather. It looked ancient, its edges frayed and stained with dark, unidentifiable blotches. The cover was blank, but the moment I touched it, the whispers grew louder, pressing against my skull like invisible hands. I opened it to the first page. The writing was jagged and erratic, as if the author's hand had trembled uncontrollably. The words were written in a language I didn't recognize, but somehow I understood them. It spoke of the building, of the basement, and of the thing beneath it. The journal described it as an ancient entity, a creature older than time itself. It was bound to this place, trapped beneath layers of stone and concrete, waiting for a key to set it free. I flipped to the final page and froze. My name was written there, scrawled in the same jagged handwriting. Beneath it, a single sentence: the key must turn. That night, I dreamed of the basement again. But this time, I wasn't alone. The walls were lined with figures, shadowy and indistinct, their glowing eyes watching as I stood over the cracks in the floor. The symbols glowed brighter, pulsing in time with the whispers. The shadowy figure emerged from the darkness, its form clearer than ever. It stood taller than I remembered, its limbs impossibly long, its face a featureless void. "Do you understand now?" it said, its voice a low rumble that vibrated through the air. I nodded, tears streaming down my face. "You are the key," it said, "and the door must open." I woke up on the basement floor. The cracks beneath me glowed with a blinding light, and the air was heavy with the stench of decay. The symbols on the floor shifted and writhed, as if alive, and the whispers had reached a deafening crescendo. The thing in the cracks was moving. Its skeletal hand emerged first, clawing at the edges of the broken concrete. Then came its head, a grotesque amalgamation of shadow and bone, its glowing eyes fixed on me. I tried to run, but my body wouldn't move. The whispers surrounded me, pressing against my skull, forcing me to stay. The figure emerged fully, towering over me, its form impossibly large. It reached out, one clawed hand resting on my chest. "You are the key," it said again, "and the key must turn." I felt it then, the thing inside me. It had been there all along, buried deep within my soul, waiting for the right moment to awaken. The figure's hand pressed harder against my chest, and I felt something break inside me. The whispers stopped. The world went silent, and then the ground beneath me gave way. I fell into darkness, the air rushing past me as I plunged deeper and deeper. When I finally hit the ground, I was no longer in the basement. The space around me was vast and empty, a void filled with shifting shadows and faint, flickering lights. The figure stood before me, its glowing eyes the only source of illumination. "You have done well," it said. I opened my mouth to speak, but no sound came out. The figure stepped closer, its presence overwhelming. "This world is ours now," it said, "and you will be its herald." I woke up in my apartment. The cracks were gone, the whispers silent. The air was still and cold, and the faint smell of mildew had returned. For a moment, I thought it was over, but when I looked out the window, I saw nothing but darkness. The city was gone. The world outside had been consumed, replaced by the void I had seen in the basement. I was no longer alone. The shadows moved through the apartment, their glowing eyes watching me from every corner. I could hear the whispers again, faint but growing louder. And then I realized they weren't coming from the walls or the floor. They were coming from me. I don't know what I am anymore. I can feel it inside me, the thing that was awakened in the basement. It's a part of me now, a shadow that will never leave. The cracks are spreading again, this time across my skin. I see the symbols in my reflection, glowing faintly beneath the surface. The whispers grow louder every day, their message clear. It's almost time. I don't know what will happen when the time comes. But I do know one thing. I am the key, and the door is about to open.